So it has been a few weeks since I last did a time-lapse of me 3D printing a water block for the Raspberry Pi. And this is probably going to be the last update on this saga, because even though I got the measurements right, I can still pull out the barb fittings fairly easily because the threads aren't too deep. And even when I did a round 2, when I didn't show the printing of it or the redesign of it, it does clamp onto the tubing fairly well, but I'm still running into a fairly big problem. It leaks a lot. To understand why it leaks, we need to look at how 3D printers work and the design itself. 3D printers essentially draw just 2 or 3 layers of outline. You can specify what this number is, of course, and then it just scribbles it in, and in between these thin walls it'll do some kind of filler pattern, but really the only thing you have to make it waterproof are these thin walls on all the sides. And because I'm 3D printing on such a tight scale here, the walls are only 2 layers thick on the bottom surface and on all the walls. Now, that's not a problem normally, because this plastic is hot enough that it melts and helps to seal up a lot of those gaps. And if I were to just fill this water block up in the kitchen sink and just leave it sitting there, it actually would not leak. But when I hook up an aquarium pump to this, the pressure is so great that it kind of finds any weakness in the weave, so to speak, of this melted plastic, and it makes it leak when it didn't before. And a lot of these leaks are happening in places where the outer edge of this water block is meeting some of the top zigzag back and forth, where those 2 seams don't really line up and melt together as well as I would have liked. So, as long as I'm working on as small a scale as this, unless I were to go back with like a very small concentrated heat source like a soldering iron, I'm not really going to truly get this completely watertight. Certainly not watertight enough to where I could let it run for months on end with a bunch of water pressure. So, I'm either going to have to give up on 3D printing water blocks entirely, or I could get an even bigger heat sink, say big enough to cover up this GPU over here, 3D print something much bigger, and see if we can't get a 3D printed GPU water block to work. Now, I'm not as excited about a 3D printed GPU water block, and I know that seems crazy, right? But the reason why that is because on here, the walls are so thin and the 3D printing material isn't super clear, but because the walls are thin, you can actually see the fluid going through, kind of like a plexiglass water block. But if I were to do it 5 or 6 layers thick, you would not see the color of the fluid inside. So it would cool down the GPU, maybe, but it wouldn't look as cool as I would hope for. So we'll see if I get around to it or not. It's definitely not in the schedule for the next month because I have other cool stuff, but we'll see if I get to it in January through March. But if you do want to see something cool that's already out, make sure to check some of these videos over here, get subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one.